the way that the Lord designed marriage, like it's holy and it is covenant. And I think as a culture, we've ran marriage through the shredder and been like, it doesn't matter. Like
it does do whatever.
It's just a piece of paper. Like, but the way that the Lord made it, it is two people like laying their lives down for each other. Like that's what it's supposed to be. And it's supposed to be like for richer, for poorer, for sickness and in health. The Lord he's a good dad, and he designed this in a specific way. And I trust that he knows the best way to go about this. And if it costs me something, like if it costs me money, if it costs me convenience, I'll do it because you know best. And I don't want to go the convenient, easy route. Like sometimes it might sound good, but it's short term and I'm in it for the long term.
Hello and welcome to the Christians Who Date podcast with
Lauren Bornick,
Kalli Christofferson,
and Andrea Alley.
What a great voice.
The dramatic pause.
Your podcast voice has gotten on par.
It's just, man, it's something. It's beautiful.
I hope everyone noticed how we changed it up that time, because usually we say my name first. And
I noticed.
I was wondering about that, and I was like missing your name. I was like, when is she going to tell us?
Oh, when?
Like, whoa, she's being so humble right now. She's letting us go first.
Our fearless podcast leader.
It's so true.
So Kalli's going to tell us today how men pick up women in Montana.
Such a good story.
Yeah. Get ready, guys. Take some notes. So the other day, I'm driving down Main Street. Everybody knows where that is.
Oh, yeah. We all have a Main Street.
Yeah. Everybody's got one. And this car, pulls up next to me. And this guy like has his window down. And I think mine was like cracked or something. But he's like, hey. So I like look over, like roll down my window a bit more. It's like, hey. And he's like, do you want to race? And also Main Street has a ton of stoplights. So this is just not your ideal racing street.
I cannot.
I was just like, no, I'm good. And then he was like, oh, come on. Are you sure? I was like, yeah, no, I'm good. And he's like, well, you're really cute. I was like,
oh, thank you.
I was like, thank you. And then he tried to say, oh, I think he was like, what song are you listening to right now? And then the light turned green. And I was like, I'm just going to keep driving. So I like started driving away. And then he like cut in, or I think he tried to like, drive next to me for a little bit. And I was just like not paying attention to this man. I'm like, nah, I'm not going to race you, dude. And then he like cut in front of me and like drove away. I was like, there you go.
Hey.
So,
he had nothing to lose.
Really won me over. I was like, went home wishing I had raced that man. So big regret.
Probably like the closest thing he's seen to a rom-com is like The Fast and the Furious or something. So
he's like, this worked.
He's like, I know how to pick up women.
Like,
I'm just surprised that you talked to him. If I was in LA, I'd be like, never roll down my windows. I'm like, this person is going to kidnap me. Like, I'd be like, I'm terrified. They're going to kidnap me. Like, I cannot.
When Lauren and Andrea visited, we realized that Lauren has a lot of LA trauma because everywhere we went, she was like, people are going to steal these things and people are going to break in. And I'm like, oh,
they do.
I was like, in Montana, we just leave stuff and people don't
LA,
like,
you left your keys in your car at like the restaurant we were at for 2 hours. And you're like, where's my keys? Oh, it's sitting by your ignition. And I was like, what the like, where am I? Like, what is this land? And you're like, we don't lock our doors. I'm like, I will die. Like, I'm like trying to stay alive here,
In
So
Montana,
that was a one-time situation that Kalli left her keys in the car.
I mean,
she was so chill about it. She's like, oh, left my keys in my car. I would have been like, oh my gosh.
And that was
a miracle.
That was because Andrea called us and I got distracted and I just like left my keys in my car. So Andrea, it was your fault.
Blaming Andrea for your car not getting stolen.
Well, I'm going to blame my
for almost getting
stolen. For getting delayed.
Wow, we could keep blaming
on Montana or
no, because that's why I was calling you, is because my flight was delayed.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah,
but that wasn't Montana's fault. That was Texas.
So LA
yeah,
trauma.
no, I said I'm going to blame
what we're
my
talking
flight.
about today.
but live on the podcast, we're going to unpack Lauren's trauma from LA.
Oh
from
my
LA.
gosh. No, thank you.
Where did it start?
Don't worry. It comes out all the time during the podcast anyways.
Oh gosh.
But
man.
we're a different breed over here in Montana. So that's
chill.
all that we have to say.
Nobody's
we're chill.
arguing with that. I'm
super
somewhere
chill.
in the middle.
Oh
That's
my
true.
gosh.
In
Seasoned.
the middle.
Yeah.
So good. Well, Dre, what are we talking about today?
So what we are talking about is we're continuing our series that's kind of just on what does it mean to be a Christian who dates? Mostly like what does the Christian part mean? And so yeah, we're talking through like our values, different things that we feel like set us apart, maybe from the way that culture does it or the way that you see in the movies or TV shows. What's different about the way that we date. And so specifically today, we're going to talk a little about cohabitation.
Whoa, buzzword.
Big word.
Big word there. Yeah.
What is that cohabitation, Dre? According to Webster Dictionary.
Cohabitation. I didn't actually look up the definition. I don't know
it's okay.
what persona just came out right there. But cohabitation is living together before you're married. And I would say
Simply
in the context of this podcast, it means that you're living together with someone that you're also romantically with. And
indulging with.
Indulging, wow. Like an ice cream sundae.
Praise God.
You are doing romantic things with this person. Yeah.
We're giggly today.
I know.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. Okay, so cohabitation, living together and sleeping together before marriage. We kind of said that on our last podcast, the kind of intro to this series. We talked about how this is like a big thing that, I mean, we don't talk about it on the first date, you know, but like if we continue dating someone, this is a conversation that comes up, like, where do you stand on this? And so we kind of just wanted to dive into maybe like what culture at large thinks about this and where they're kind of at, and maybe even some of the logic or the reasoning behind it, because it's a very common thing actually. Like I think I read something, I looked up a bunch of nerdy stats for you guys, but basically like 69% of Americans say that living together is fine even if you don't plan to get married.
Wow.
And there's a lot also that say like they see it as a step towards marriage, but I think that just kind of gives us a picture of like, okay, this is like, you know, pretty decent majority that believes that this is okay. So we're just going to talk through maybe some reasons that we've heard from people like behind living together before marriage, and to be honest, a lot of them make a lot of sense. Like if that hadn't been grilled into me since I was a child that it's you don't live together before marriage, I feel like I'd be like, oh yeah, totally, that makes a ton of sense. Like, why would you make a long-term commitment to somebody that you haven't even tried to like share a space with? I think that's a big one I've heard. Like, have you guys heard any others?
Yeah, I mean, here in LA, it's like, oh, well, why not, you know, live with my boyfriend or my girlfriend because I can save money if we live together. So that's like really easy way for us to both save money. And then also to figure out like, are we compatible for marriage or living together long term? So I think a lot of people are like, oh, this is our next step in commitment, our next step in compatibility. And then can we like each other in the mundane? Can we like each other in the in and out of the everyday together because we are in each other's space? And so I feel like it's like a test trial, you know, when you're living with your partner, you get to try out like, oh, could we do this? Could we see ourselves making a family? All of that. And so it seems very easy to be like, oh, that's definitely like the next step of what you're going to do. Because then if you don't work out or not like each other in the everyday, when, you know, roll out of bed or, you know, when your breath smells, then we can break up, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
One more nerdy stat, sorry, to back up what Lauren just said. 38% of people who are living together say that it was either finances, like you were saying, rent in LA, or convenience. Like those were major reasons for why they decided to move in, is because it was just financially made sense or it was more convenient, which is interesting. So, Kalli, what have you heard?
Heard on the streets. I can totally see of Montana. You know, the wild. No, I can totally see the logic behind why people like live together. Like in a relationship, you're always kind of going to the next step, like you're increasing commitment and just trying to take your relationship deeper. So I can see why people are like, oh, that makes total sense. And it's like what Lauren said with, oh, can we be in each other's space all the time? What would that be like? And you don't have a grid for it because you've never done it.
Right.
So I can totally see why so many people do it and why it's become really normalized and really common. So it's nothing. Yeah. What I have to say about that isn't like anything crazy different, but I'm just like, oh, I totally see the logic behind it. And yeah, rent, that's like a super valid reason. Convenience. And then just, you like being around each other a lot. So you're like, oh, we can be around each other like 24/7 and it's so fun and it's great. So again, I totally see the logic behind it.
Yeah. And I think people, go ahead, Dre.
I was just going to say, I feel like that actually happens a lot where it's kind of like almost a slow thing. And it's like, oh, they're basically living here. So they may as well just live here.
Totally.
It just incrementally like happens that way. But what were you going to say, Lauren?
Yeah. And I was going to say, I think a lot of people, because I would say like our parents or grandparents, like it wasn't as common for you to live, especially my grandparents. I don't remember them ever talking about people living together before marriage. Like you would date and then you get married, you move in. But I think because of the divorce rate and just seeing so many broken families, I think there's more of a fear of the commitment of marriage in our culture. Yep. And so I think there has been a rising like, why don't we just be partners for a while? Why don't we just date for a long time and live together? But then we both have an out whenever we want. Yeah. So that I don't have to have my heart broken in a sense. It's almost like a protection mechanism, I think, because if once you're fully committed in marriage, you're like, shoot, we're stuck. Like we got to figure this out. And so I think there has been even a growth of like living together to figure out before you get married, like, so you can avoid divorce or you can avoid having to commit to someone for life that you don't want to. So this is like I can see how people want it to be like a precautionary thing.
Yeah, so totally.
Thoughts.
I've actually heard that our generation, millennials, and I think Gen Z too, we're the most jaded just as a generation of divorce because we've been the most affected by divorce. So now 100%. We're the most jaded by marriage, and that's why, or about marriage. So that's why we're taking longer to get married. And that's why a lot of people are living together is because, a lot of people were hurt by that long-term commitment that was supposed to be forever not working out.
Yeah. And I think there's a breakdown of marriage in general where it's becoming watered down, where it's just like, oh, like marriage, like not a big deal as much like of a commitment. Like, I think we want the easy route. And so I think you can see it. It's like, less and less people are getting married. There is like a fear of marriage. There is, like more having to people getting remarried again. And so, I think there is a jadedness, like you said, Dre.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I think we've kind of touched on this, but I think the going belief out there in culture is that if you live together before marriage, you will have a higher chance of staying together after marriage. And actually, so we have I'm even gonna have a source this time, you guys. Can you believe
Let's
this?
go.
I know. It's not just gonna be like research.
Cited
National
research.
survey from the University of Denver. said that 50 to 65% of Americans believe that living together before marriage will improve their odds of relationship success. So we've kind of talked about that. That's a big reason why I think people want to do this. But what does the research actually say is that what they found, because they've also studied the other side of this. Does it actually prepare you for relationship success? Same University of Denver study found that couples who lived together before marriage were more likely to see their marriages end than those who did not live together before marriage. And then people who reported that their top reason for moving in together was to test the relationship or because it made sense financially were more likely to see their marriages end than people who did so because they wanted to spend more time with their partner.
Wow.
Which is interesting. Yeah. So if you're like already unsure about your relationship and you just want to test it, like, which is so interesting because I'm like, this plays out in more than cohabitation. We think like,
100%.
I've thought this before. I'm like, if we have this situation, it'll fix us.
Yeah.
People even think that about marriage. They're like, if we get married, it'll fix all of our problems. And I like that's not how it works.
No.
Yeah.
So super interesting.
Sure. Yes. Some stuff you had talked about, Andrea, just like with living together, it elevates a lot of things that I think don't need to be elevated. I heard a woman talking about this the other day, and she's put it that things that aren't necessarily a big deal become deal breakers in these scenarios where people are living together. She's like, when people get married, you've committed, you're choosing them. Hopefully you're in it for better or for worse. But she's like, suddenly you're putting like these unrealistic expectations on each other in a scenario where you can back out. So she's like, oh, let's say like, you really hate the way they unload the dishwasher, or it's a bunch of little things that suddenly have this whole other weight to them. And she's like, that marriage has like a certain grace to it. She's like, but you can't enter into that grace until you're actually married. And so suddenly these really small things become really big things. And so she's like, people are just like more likely to bow out in those situations because it's like, oh, actually, like this isn't what I pictured in my head. And so they come up with like ways to get out of it because of that. So that was like a small thing, but I was like, oh, that's actually a really good point that she made.
Yeah. I wonder if even like movies have kind of influenced that, because movies cut all that stuff out, like,
yes,
it's like this beautiful, like kind of refined experience. And I think people feel that way at first. Honestly, there's a lot about the early dating phase that's like exciting and you're putting your best foot forward, and you're like, I remember like I used to do my hair like every date, and then like at some point you're like, dang, has he like seen my hair down in like the last like 2 months? Like,
totally.
And so, yeah, I think people like get scared when they lose that kind of movie part of it, maybe, and they they like think something's out there that's going to be that way the whole time, but it's, that's not reality. So
that was also like a con I heard of a couple that I think they lived together before they got married, but they were just like, honestly, we kind of regret that we jumped into the phase of living together, because they're like, dating is only like a short period of your relationship. And suddenly you're just around each other all the time. You don't really care as much, or it's like, oh, if we like get ready, it's a big deal, like that kind of a thing. And they're like, there is like something special about each stage and season of your relationship, and you don't get to get it back. And so they're like, we're really bummed that we shortcut that stage of our relationship, because you don't get to get that back in that way. So something
that's like some life stuff right there. Like, we just want to go to the next thing. What's the next phase? What's the next stage? Totally. It's like you have to fight to be present you know, in the part that you're in and actually enjoy it. Because, life comes at you fast, as what's his name?
As you always say. Andrea constantly says that.
As Ferris Bueller and I always say.
So good. Well, should we go into the reason of like why we don't live with our boyfriends and then like where that came from?
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, let's talk about that. Because I think too, like when you're doing something that's so cultural, like it's good to, I think like all of us have actually thought this through. Like none of us are just like, oh, this is what my mom always told me. You know,
Yeah.
like
I mean, I've been tested in it. I've been pushed in it.
Totally. Like that doesn't last. If you're doing something when you're 30 because your mom told you to, you know, like it's like that doesn't happen. Like it has to become your own at some point. So yeah, Lauren, do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, so we're talking about, all of us are going to share specifically reasons of like why we don't live with our boyfriends before marriage. And we've all have different stories about that, of different ways we've been tested in that boundary. And I think at the end of the day, like, I mean, yeah, I grew up in a home that it was very looked down upon. If you would have, like my mom, oh my gosh, she would have
Tammy.
Tammy would have been so mad if I lived with a boyfriend. I think at first it would have been like a shame thing. Like I'm disappointing my parents. I'm letting them down by living with my boyfriend. And the thing is though, as I've lived on my own basically since I was 18 out of the house, like you have to make your own choices. So yes, this was part of, okay, I grew up in a family that all profess Christians. This is kind of one of these rules that you don't have it, you know, you don't live with someone for marriage, you know, and there's so many different reasons that are actually like really beautiful of like, well, you want someone to fully, you know, one of the reasons, you know, my parents said is because you want someone to be able to fully commit to you and not just like half commit to you, like that they can have that option out. Like if they are willing to marry you, if they want to marry you, then they need to commit to you fully. Like they don't. And so I think they did that as like a protection mechanism for me, especially like, you know, they're like, yeah, we don't want you to be having like sex outside of marriage that's made for covenant. So I heard a lot from my family and like the churches I grew up in. And, you know, in your brain, you're like, I don't want to disappoint God. Like, I don't have sex. I don't have sex outside of marriage. Like, God's going to be so disappointed or da da da.
Yeah.
And then I think as I grew older, I started to really just be like, is this true? Like, would God be mad that if I lived with my boyfriend or had sex before marriage? Like, would God still love me? And I believe God loves us. I just think God is a really good dad and has really good ways for his kids. And it's not to control us, but it's because he's like, I just want to protect your heart. So I, throughout like my 20s, you know, I didn't really get into super serious relationships where we'd even have to get to that point of living together. But I knew, I was like, okay, this is a standard, but maybe with the right guy, I would live with him. And there's a guy I was seriously dating, and he had a different idea of like, he was like, oh, I'd live with my girlfriend, like, you know, and that was a boundary I put up pretty early on of like, no, I won't live with you. And as we got more serious, that kept being tested of like, well, can I just stay for a couple days? Or like, why can't we live together was the significant other, you know? And I remember at the time, my heart was just like, no, like this is my boundary. Why are you trying to cross my boundary? And it wasn't even about like per se, okay, I don't want to sin. It was more just like, this is a boundary I have to protect my body and my heart at this time, and you're pushing this boundary. So it was even more about boundaries. But then I also started to really question like, well, could I live with this person before marriage? And my heart just didn't feel protected. Like it didn't feel like, I was like, if we're having to like test ourselves, then we need to just date more. Like if we think that we're already seeing each other every day, we're already spending like so much time together, like what does this us living per se under the same roof, like what else is that going to have to prove like to our dating, like, you know, like almost like, oh, if we can make it to this level, then we can get married. And so I was just like, oh, then actually there's other issues going on. It's not just us living together that will fix it or prove that then we're good to go for marriage. It was other things. So for me, it was like a heart protection. I felt really safe knowing like, no, like if we're going to like fully be bought into like us being in covenant and marriage, then like, heck yeah, let's live together. But like, I don't think we need to have this testing stage in between our dating and getting engaged and all that of us living together. Because we already had all the data. Like we had, you know, like if you're dating enough, you have data. And so I think some people like think I need more data first before I can like commit to you. And that's through living together. And so, I mean, another thing I could like keep going on this, but one more thing I'll say, and I'll let you all share too, is like, we are saying like, I want to save myself for marriage. And, you know, people are across the spectrum with that too. Christians are across the spectrum with cohabitating. People are across the spectrum with like, what does purity and sexuality look like within dating? But us three have been like, no, we want to save ourselves for like our husbands. And so if you're living with someone, you're going to be having sex, period.
Yeah.
Like the people, way to go, that are like, we can live together but not have sex. I'm like, if I'm living with you, I'm having sex with you. Like you're my boyfriend, like period. Like
it's hard enough when you're not living together.
Totally. Oh my gosh, being unsupervised, you know, as an adult. So so I'm just kind of like, way to go. But like, why would you put yourself in that situation of like, yeah, like it's like you might as well. And so it's like, okay, if I want to save myself in that way for that one person, then like this is like just a beautiful buffer. So those are some thoughts.
Yeah,
great thoughts, Lauren.
So good. Thank you for sharing.
Of course.
Something that made me think of, because I've heard people say like, oh, like we're living together but we're not having sex. And okay,
I'm like,
even
what? That's like Mary being having a virgin baby. Like, I don't know.
A virgin baby. Virgin birth.
Jesus. Yeah. I guess all babies are virgins.
I mean, I was like, Jesus was a virgin, so
virgin. Okay, anyways, you guys know what I mean. It's like a miracle.
It's a miracle.
If you have no sex drive, way to go. Anyways.
But even for those couples that, you know, let's say they're like, yeah, we live together, but we don't have sex. Like there's something just special and sacred about getting to live together in the covenant of marriage. I remember, so my dad's a pastor. And I remember him like speaking about marriage. He's the best. Norm, shout out.
We love Norm.
But he was just like talking about like the beauty of marriage, and he was talking about like people living together outside of marriage. And I just remember he said like, you know, like living together, that's a privilege of marriage. Like it's one of the reasons why it's so special and it's so great, because you shouldn't be able to do that outside of marriage. But within that and the way that the Lord designed it, like you get that privilege. And I just remember like that really sitting with me. And the way that the Lord designed marriage, like it's holy and it is covenant. And I think as a culture, we've ran marriage through the shredder and been like, it doesn't matter. Like
it does do whatever.
It's just a piece of paper. Like it doesn't, like you might as well live together and all these things. But the way that the Lord made it, like it is two people like laying their lives down for each other. Like that's what it's supposed to be. And it's supposed to be like for richer, for poorer, for sickness and in health. Like it's supposed to be like, I'm going to spend the best days of my life with you, and I'm going to spend the worst days of my life with you. And I'm not going to change my view on you in those times. Like that's what we're committing to. And so I have just a really high value for marriage. And Lauren mentioned this too. It's just like with our view of God, I'm like, okay, the Lord he's a good dad. And so he designed this in a specific way. And I trust that he knows the best way to go about this. And if it costs me something, like if it costs me money, if it costs me convenience, if it costs me whatever, like I'll do it because you know best. And I don't want to go the convenient, easy route. Like sometimes it might sound good, but it's short term and I'm in it for the long term. So that's my soapbox.
We love soap.
Yeah, it's the best. So clean.
Preach it.
Dre, thoughts?
Yeah, man. I feel like I would echo a lot of what you guys have already said, but I do remember there was only one guy I feel like where we had pretty different views on this. And we didn't get far enough to, I feel like, where it was really tested, but I do remember thinking like, man, like I'm kind of bummed because he had already lived with at least a couple people, and I was like, bummer, like if this actually went somewhere, it would be a brand new thing for me that nobody has ever experienced. Like, you know, you're the only person that I've ever lived with. Well, I mean, okay, not person, but like
you have those right here.
Because obviously Kalli and Lauren are here. But
besides your dad.
Yeah, besides my dad, right. You're the only, this is the only man that I've ever lived with. And I think it's the same with like sleeping together and sex before marriage. It's like it's an experience that you're like, it's so cool that just you and I have that experience. And even if you come to the Lord later and you've fought for this for some amount of time, like that is a huge win in my book. Like I just want to see that like you, first of all, like you're surrendered. Like Kalli was saying, like what's your view of God? Like do you believe he's controlling or do you believe that he is good? Like because that's gonna change how seriously you take the things that he asks you to do, you know? So yeah, I'm looking for somebody who believes that he's good and that what he tells us to do is he's telling us that because it's the best plan. But yeah, I just remember feeling that like, oh, that'd be kind of a bummer. I feel this as a loss, but he doesn't, you know, like he feels like he did everything fine and he would do it again that way if he could, you know? So it was just kind of interesting. But I was like, I love the idea of these experiences were meant to be with just you and your husband. Like, I'm like, I love how that person that I marry is going to get part of me that no other man ever has. Like, I love that. I think that's so beautiful. And no matter where he's come from, like, that's a gift that I am excited to be able to give him. So,
yeah. And I think it's so costly, especially now where it's not as like looked down upon to live with your significant other. It's, if anything, it's more like celebrated and people are like, great idea, you know, like figure this out before you get married. Like if you really want to be together so you don't get divorced. And we're saying, no, like we're choosing like a path that is like less walked or maybe even like even I've had people be like, that's crazy, like that you want to do that, or that's irrational, or that's dangerous. I've had someone say it's dangerous to not live with someone or not live with, you need to live with your significant other before marriage to prevent you know, divorce or whatever. And so there's a lot of different ways, but I think for me, you know, for those listening, wherever you're at in this belief of cohabitation, like, first of all, our heart is not to like shame you if you're like, no, I'm going to like live with my partner. We're just saying like, hey, we're out here saying us three are like, we've committed to a way where we are like, no, I'm going to wait for marriage to the best of my ability. And I'm also going to wait. I'm not going to live with my boyfriend or partner before marriage. Like I'm committing, I want to commit to one person in marriage. And like, that's why you date. Like, that's why you date. That's why you go through an engagement stage, you know, before marriage. But it's because we're having a longer vision of being married to one person, building a family with someone and serving God. And we want to do it what we believe is God's way, not because he is holding out on us or because he will give us a better life if we follow these ways. We don't believe that. I'm like, dude, my life could still suck, but I just believe God's heart for us. Like, I believe God's heart for the church. Like, I believe that God loves us and he has good things for us. And even the Bible doesn't fully per se say like, do not live with your boyfriend or girlfriend. But it also is saying like, yeah, don't be in like in immorality, like in sexuality before marriage. And so that is for only one person within the covenant of marriage. And so that's what we're trying to live out, to the best of our ability, because we just are like, yeah, we think like God wants to protect our hearts.
Yeah. And there's a few scriptures, just wanted to throw in there.
Bring them in, Cal.
I was wondering if we talk about the Bible.
I love the Bible. Hebrews 13:4 says, I think this is NIV, marriage should be honored by all and the marriage bed kept pure, for God will judge the adulterer and all of the sexually immoral. So I'm like, that just straight up is like, hey, keep your marriage bed pure. Like, don't be messing around with things that it's not your time yet. Like maybe it will, but it's not your time yet. And then I just love like the example that Jesus set was like, okay, where's your bar with like what you think is okay to do? And then he always raised it. He was like, he's okay, you think it's okay to look at a woman lustfully. And I'm going to bring the scripture into this too. So it's Matthew 5:27-30. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. So Jesus was like pretty radical with this. It was just, and didn't mean literally do this, but he was like, if this is causing you to sin, like get rid of it. And he's like, if you commit that thing in your heart, like you've committed that already. So in Isaiah 55:8-9, it says, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. So again, it's just like the Lord knows better, and he calls us as people that love him and want to follow him. He calls us to a higher standard. And so it's naturally going to stand out. It's naturally going to look a lot different than the way culture does things, but it's supposed to. Yeah.
Mic drop.
Yeah. I know. Kalli's good at those mic drops.
I know. She has a mic drop.
She's so good at them.
So good.
I was going to share a couple more stats.
Please do.
I'm like pouring out my heart, and Andrea's like, okay, according to research.
I know.
She's like, yeah, well, that's nice, but research says.
The facts
like, these are the facts.
I'm like, my heart needs protection.
Teacher Dre is coming
I love the Lord.
Love that.
Okay, stats.
The facts.
For those logic people.
This is from Pew Research Center. So they found that, because, they conduct a lot of surveys. And so one of their surveys, they found married adults have higher levels of relationship satisfaction and trust than those who are just living with a partner. So it was 58% versus 41%. And then married adults are also more likely than those who are living together to say that they have a lot of trust in their spouse, to be faithful to them, act in their best interest, always tell them the truth, and handle money responsibly. So the biggest one that sticks out is just you have higher levels of relationship satisfaction in general if you're just committed. And I think too, like, I even found this in a relationship, is like, it's so easy to just get in like this mode where you're very self-protecting and you're just like, how can I get this person to serve me all the time and meet all my needs and make sure that I'm okay. Like it's so easy to go there. And it really takes a lot to be like, what are his needs? How can I be a safe person for him? Like, how can I show him that I'm committed? Like, it's hard to not have all these protectors up and have this like thing, you're holding over someone's head, like, I'm going to leave if you if you do something that I don't like, you know, like it's, of course, that's like, if you're just thinking about yourself, like, yeah, that's the better, like, that's what you're going to want to do, is just be like, hey, if you do something I don't like, I'm going to be able to leave. But think about, like, you know, if the kind of relationship you want, because the kind of relationship you want is you're both saying like, hey, like, you can't get rid of me, you know, like,
Yeah.
like, obviously, like, if there's abuse or something going on like that, like, that's different. But it's like, no, it's going to be really difficult for you to get, like, it's going to take a lot more than like you leaving your socks on the floor. One of the things I found, this is like a Jewish rabbi, and I can't pronounce his name at all, but this is what he used to say, apparently. Being too close when you're supposed to be apart causes you to be apart when you're supposed to be close.
Dang.
I know.
That's from a mysterious
really
Jewish
good.
rabbi.
From a mysterious Jewish rabbi.
Shall remain nameless, but man, could he speak?
Was it Jesus? Who said this? Wow, plot twist.
If you are like, I am a believer, like, I love the Lord, like, I call myself a Christian, like, this is the path that I've chosen to follow, and you're cohabitating or something that you're like not totally sure what your stance is, then I would challenge you, just as somebody else who is a believer, like, to just really ask yourself some questions and be honest about the answers. Like, why? Because I think what is so easy to do in a relationship is just graze over stuff that's uncomfortable to look at. Like, oh my gosh, all day long, it's easier to just be like, I don't want to have that conversation. I don't want to look at that issue. I just want to graze over it. And it's like, look at it. Like, why do you feel like you need to live with this person? Or like, why do you feel like you can't fully commit and marry them? Like, why, you know, like, why does it need to be this in between kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out situation? So just be honest with yourself about that, you know, like, it's like, and it, like Lauren said, we're not trying to shame or condemn anybody, but it's just kind of like, I just always think that the Bible gives you this standard that reveals the heart, right? Like, it's meant to like give you questions to ask yourself and be like, okay, what's going on? Like, on a deeper level, what's going on? Because we're not concerned about the like what's the actual like living together situation. We're concerned about what's at the root of it. You know what I mean? So yeah.
And something you said too, Andrea, about like the whole 1 foot in, 1 foot out thing is, I think that mentality like creeps into marriage too. Like, if you live with each other beforehand, like, you've already kind of created like habits and a routine and just like a mindset. And so I think then when you're married, you're subconsciously, you're like, well, why is this like any different? And I think that so much of like our patterns and our habits and our behaviors leak into like every area of our life. It's not just contained to one specific place. And so I think people just go in and they can not be aware of it, but that is a very like present factor in a marriage where people maybe lived together before.
Yeah. That's a good point, Cal. Lauren, any last thoughts from you?
Ooh. Not that fully come to mind, besides that I'll just like keep reiterating probably throughout this podcast of like, God's heart is good for us. Like, he wants what's best for us. Like, he loves us. And I just can't help but be like, God, I'll do whatever it takes to like live a life surrendered to you, because you're not a bad God. You don't hate us. You're not here just like trying to ruin our lives and have it like a fun sucking life. Yeah. Like, I'm like, he wants my relationships to thrive. Like, the scriptures talk about it to help us thrive. And he also wants our future families to thrive. And that's through one man, one woman, married together, committed through life. Of course, there's exceptions to why people divorce. We know like adultery, abuse, like there's things that happen, but we're saying like God has this plan of family and kingdom that he wants us to be able to have and to live. And so I'm like, okay, I get it. Like I get it. And so how do I, to the best of my ability, like follow that plan? And we're messy in it. And I'm like, yeah, I feel like at times I'm like, I don't know if I believe your plan is best. You know, I question his plan. And I think that's okay to question it. But I think it's really something you and God have to figure out through his scripture and hopefully through community as well, of like, well, what does God have for me? Because I think this day and age, everyone's like, God approves of anything I do. Like he loves me.
He's
like I can
high-fiving me all the time.
I can do whatever I want, whenever I want. And I'm like,
yeah,
is that really like what scripture says? Like, does it like that you can just do whatever you want? Like, no, it doesn't. There is like, there are ways and standards he has for it. And it's a narrow road. It is a narrow road. And it does take, it is costly, but it's because it's what's best. And so I think we're all kind of like, yeah, we're going to commit to this narrow road, even if it's costly, even if it sucks, even if people look at us and think we're doing something dangerous or crazy. And I'm like, hey, this is like how I want to live my life. And so yeah, so those are some thoughts.
Yeah, that's so good, Lauren. I love that. It's true. And like, I hope too, if you're somebody who is holding these standards and you just feel like I am the only one trying to do this, like you're not alone. I hope you feel that. I hope you feel like, because it feels that way, right? Like when it's all over Instagram and it's all over like the media and it's all over movies and culture, you just feel like, man, nobody lives this way anymore. Like, but that's not true. So here we are saying like, yeah, it's the narrow road, like Lauren was saying, but we're following it.
Yep. Sticking to it.
We're sticking to it. Yeah. And if
they're
you
not
screwed up
alone.
in this area, there's so much grace.
So true. I was going to say, they're not alone. There's 3 of us right here. We're all over the United States.
Yeah.
There's one person in Montana, one person in Texas, and one person in LA that all live this way.
Yep. That is
there
right.
You go.
Representing.
So,
yeah. Okay. Well, love you guys. If you have any questions or rebukes about this episode, just let Lauren know.
I was going to say send them to Lauren specifically.
Send them to me. I want to hear. I'm happy to hear.
She's our HR.
Give you a hug.
Lauren's our HR.
All about the heart. I won't have stats to throw at you. I don't have any.
Oh man.
Lauren, you wanted me to bring stats to this episode and I went and found them.
Yeah, this woman, oh my gosh, encyclopedia.
I didn't even read them all.
Google herself.
If you want more stats,
contact me. Andrea.
Yeah, exactly. And if you just want a good talking to, Cal's got you.
That's true. If you want to be preached, if you want somebody to preach your socks off,
literally, you'll drop your mic. You'll drop your mic.
Just a little bit of rebuke in there. There'll be a lot of kindness too. But yeah.
She is the most straight talker you'll ever get. And I'm like, that's good. That's really good. We need that.
Good. Yeah,
we need more of that straight talking too.
Yeah.
All in love. All in love.
Yeah.
All in love.
Yeah.
Of course.
We love you guys. Thanks for listening. And we will talk to you next time.
Bye.
Bye.